Thanks, Brad. I'm filling in for Steve, whose child is ill, or he would certainly be here. It's great to have you guys up. We've been down quite a bit with the reconnaissance company and with Warren's group, but one of the challenges that you gave us when we brought our tech down and said, let's work on training and performance, first we had to learn your needs. We tried to come in very humbly without knowing anything, because we didn't know anything about your needs, frankly. We got in the door through Colonel Clark Lathine, because I would drive down the road and say, I need to get some sensors on those guys, and really wanted to learn your problem set. We thought that you were a lot like athletes in the sense that you were in a way under-measured, and you needed to be amplified, and you needed a little bit potentially more support, and we thought we had the tools. So we learned your needs, and Corbin, initially at the training at the school, the recon school, you said, look, we have a very selective process. We have 70% of guys drop out typically, and we want that 15% on the margin, because who should be reconnaissance Marines that we feel we're tortured about, because we think, and the other thing we want are early warnings. So if somebody gets in trouble, we know whether they just can't handle it or they're in trouble, so we don't lose anybody. So I thought I just set it up, a comment from you, and then Colonel Holt has a use case, and we can go there.
Great. Next. So I think we have a slide presentation. You want to go over a few things. This became really important, I think, to us a couple weeks ago, and I'm going to go through a case study, and then we'll give some questions and answers with our team. I brought them all here with me today because of this importance of this case. So a little explanation up front about who we are as a School of Infantry. We're aboard Camp Pendleton just down the road. We train 19,500 students annually with a staff of about 900 instructors and support personnel. Our mission statement's featured on the slide there. Makes us a pretty busy bunch, as you can imagine, with 27 different courses that we teach. But we are certainly pleased to be here today to learn from academia, sports teams, scientists, and some industry folks, because we don't hold all the great ideas, and it's a great day to spend with us and to learn from y'all. So I want you definitely to network with the crew that we brought up here from Camp Pendleton, California. A little bit about who we are. So as warrior athletes, as Dr. Saxon mentioned, 27 different active courses that range from 4 weeks to 5 months in length. We teach warfighting skills to our entry-level students. In that, we make basic riflemen, we make infantry, we make reconnaissance Marines, and we progress some of the advanced Marines in their careers. So we get 19-year-olds that are tough and don't know any better, and we get 35-year-olds who are a little bit wiser now, but there's one thing in common. We still carry that 100-pound pack, we still wear 40 pounds of gear, and we still have to move 20 kilometers. So we're going to talk about how we build that, how we maintain that, and how we get a little bit smarter about doing our business. In the reconnaissance training, which these guys are going to detail for us a little bit more, as you can see, it's very demanding. We prepare candidates in a 2-month-long primer course to develop their swimming skills, as you see on the bottom right, their physical strength and agility, as you see on the left, and it prepares them with necessary skills beyond normal infantry training. And just keep this in mind, for every 4 Marines that come through training, only 1 makes it. That's the only course with that much overhead to make one quality product, one quality reconnaissance Marine. And these are really the finest warrior athletes I've ever met. But, next slide. Not all goes well, and I want to talk about that. This recent case is of a reconnaissance Marine who tragically died 2 weeks ago. That's him. Pictured there while conducting a land navigation course aboard Camp Pendleton, California. Our reconnaissance leaders here today with us took so many precautions for safety, including GPS tracking systems worn on every single person with a panic button, handheld Motorola radios, manned checkpoints, game cameras. That picture is from a game camera. Local wet bulb temperature stations, mandatory meals and sleep routines. No one goes through this level of detail but reconnaissance Marines. And there's a reason they do it, because they are top performing athletes. But explaining to his mom yesterday why he died was very difficult for us. and we're still searching the answers for that. So let's go to the next slide. Something did go wrong in that land nav course. You know, he died on that course by himself. We didn't know exactly when it happened, but we did find him thanks to the GPS tracker. It was difficult for your guys, Corbin, and our medical contact team with a Polaris vehicle. But we didn't know he was in distress. We had no idea. He had no wearable device, and he didn't call. So the real question we're struggling with is, can something make the difference? Some wearable technology make the difference? We think it could, because if we would have understood his performance level, maybe even his baseline ECG, or when he went into distress, maybe we could have responded a little bit quicker than when we saw he just didn't come in on time, or he wasn't moving where he should have been. So I think we need to experiment with these biometric systems, and it certainly took on a whole new level of importance this future study we have with USC. But the real challenge is how to use this big data, and some of our folks are going to talk about that today, the big data analytics. I can tell you as a person with an iPhone or a regular phone just like you, the one I pay attention to the most is an alert that comes over my phone that says there's an Amber Alert. I know that vehicle, I'm looking for it, and so are you. That's a high level of importance. But it comes to all of our phones, no matter if we want it or not, because it binds us all to take action. Wouldn't that be great to have that kind of alert that somebody went into distress because of their wearable devices over all of our devices, and you have to take action on it? You can't ignore it. Well, currently that doesn't necessarily exist within our program or record systems, and I think it needs to. I think we need to really integrate biometric wearable technology within our programs or records. We need to figure out how to do that. So we're very keen to this study that we're going to do together to figure out what we can learn in extremis, or maybe what we can learn, you know, over time in analytics to build a more resilient Marine. So really, the pain of that loss is no different, you know, than currently some of us have felt. But having the right information at the right time can reduce risk, and I think really increase our response time. As we gather this data together with our warrior athletes, in the belief that will increase resiliency, performance, and perhaps even prevent injury by knowing how they actually can perform. Our staff here today looks forward to connecting with you today, so please spend some time afterwards with our group. So that ends our presentation.
Should have known you'd come prepared.
All right.
That was great. Yeah, please.
Okay, so what you're looking at right here are 3 different snapshots of basic reconnaissance training. It's 18 weeks long. It's comparable to what a Green Beret in the Army Special Forces would go through, or a Navy SEAL and Buds. Out of 1,000 individuals that come through the course every year that show up, only about 230 on average graduate. I started the conversation with Dr. Saxon with a very simple question. Can you tell me with biometrics who graduates? Can we look at those 230, find common points of data, and from the big data perspective, but in a small data lab, i.e. there's only 1,000 of them, look through, and can I look to see if the methods that I'm using to start this training to pick the right players, perhaps I'm using a basketball screening method to pick football players. That's my first concern. My second concern is, can I build a tool and again, I'm concerned about that individual student. Can I build a tool that gives that individual Marine the ability to improve himself? Can I give him a sensor that he can use the data to see, all right, I'm on a ruck run. I have 50 pounds on my back. It's 95 degrees outside, and I've been moving for 2.5 hours. I've got 15 minutes to 20 minutes to get where I need to be. My watch is telling me that I'm burning enough calories, and if I don't put calories in my body in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to go down as a heat case. That's what I want to do. I stress with my Marines constantly that I'm not looking for somebody that'll never quit in any situation and then push him to the self where he hurts himself. What I'm trying to do is find the guy that recognizes that he needs to do body maintenance. He's on that last 10% of what he can do as a human being, and in order to maintain that level, that high RPM, he has to know when to put things in and out of his body. And that's one of the goals we have through sensors. The other one we have working with Dr. Fox is we're trying to find ways to identify early on what's the type of individual that has the mental tools to get through this training. And if they have the right personality, but not the right mental tools, is there a way that we can teach them those tools? The Marine, it's an uncomfortable secret. The millennial that's showing up now doesn't have the same tools. Has the same personality, has the same drive, has the same desire, but he doesn't have the same mental tools as the Marines 10 years ago showing up to training. But the training standards haven't changed because war hasn't changed that much. So those are kind of the two big things we're working on with Dr. Saxon to see where we can move forward.
I'll just follow up those comments. So initially, Corbin started off and he said, we're looking for a technology, right, that we can screen guys who medically shouldn't be there, maybe, an EKG screening. Second is we're trying to find a technology that can say, hey, this is where our Marines need coaching on. So somewhere to identify the coaching. And lastly, it's a training safety mechanism, right? So if we do have a Marine that is in a unsafe physical condition, we can vector in support. What's interesting is if you look about the broad spectrum of sensors that we've talked about today, and how do we take that, how do we put it in a network, and that's the key thing. We're not always in a gym or a single location. We're in a very dispersed area where we may not even have LTE service. And especially if we would use these devices forward deployed, that really limits how we would be able to send this information back and forth. And it's funny because we got the question, I think, from table 11, like, how do you measure stress, right? And how does this tie into the psychology profile? Because we're talking about guys who are alpha personalities, right? So you may be able to detect that someone has a high heart rate, his internal core temperature is 104, but actually he's just fine, right? It's not so much measuring the data points where they're at now, but it's how they recover. It's that back-end loop that we're really looking for, because how you recover really is one of the greatest indicators on what kind of physical fitness you have. But it was interesting we got that question because we do have a sensor. And there's a team called Frontline Mind. They came in and they really, at Light Armor Reconnaissance Training Company, I wasn't worried, or I didn't have a problem with physical performance. I had an issue with coaching or mental performance. And they had this galvanic skin sensor. And as I learned more about it, it actually measures the electrical current on your skin. And it can be one of the best indicators of stress. And so what was very interesting, I'll make a really simple example, is someone who's swimming, right? Does anyone have a phobia of swimming in here? I'm just kind of, slightly, a little bit maybe, right? What's really interesting is you get in the water and maybe you can hold your breath now for 45 seconds, a minute, with a series of neurological coaching techniques. We can change that 45 seconds to 2.5 minutes relatively easily, and we're not talking months, weeks. We're actually talking about a day. And so there's some very interesting techniques out there that I think if you do pair the right sensor, you'll definitely increase your performance. I'll just close with this. The connected device is probably what's really going to differentiate which device is going to win in the end, right? I had the Nike Fuel. It worked great, but it's really sitting in a drawer right now. I use my current device right now just because it's connected. And I think as, you hear that term, the Internet of Things, I think as we do look at wireless devices that collect this biometric feedback, we need to look at the LoRaWAN network, which is, we all heard of Bluetooth, everyone knows Wi-Fi, everyone knows LTE. that LoRaWAN network is fantastic for sending small bits of data over long distances. And that's, again, another project we were looking into. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? So I think, the next logical question that comes to mind, after we've established the sensors to monitor students' training and their biometrics and their performance and how we can use that to shape the safety structure or respond rapidly. So what next, right? What next with all this big data? And I think it was brought up in the previous board, we need to find the right person for the right job. How do we do that talent management across the Marine Corps generally, but even more specifically in the reconnaissance communities? So, like Corbin brought up before, been talking with Dr. Fox about various psychometrics. Is that the right term? Did I use it right this time? So 3 areas that make up a human being, right? Mind, body, and psyche/spirit, whatever you want to call it. So how do we take this big data and identify the right people, train the right people, and then build resiliency across those 3 focus areas so we can really have a warrior that embodies the whole Marine concept? And like the gentleman down here asked about, how do we identify potential mental challenge in the future, break down psychological issues? Well, if we can take a sampling of Marines that have done very hard things, seen rough things, and are still psychologically stable, well, now we can start building a metric to say, hey, John, you fit really well here in this job, and you might not fit so well here in this job. Not good, bad, or indifferent. We just want to put the right people in the right place to mitigate risk and then mitigate negative challenges in the future.
Let me add in just to that. I think what next is really an important thing to throw out to this audience. What can make a difference? Right now, a lot of those are passive, right? All that on the wrist. Those are passive sensors where you get information and you have to do something with it. You have to make a decision. When is it going to become time to have more active sensors that says you must eat now or you must control your heart rate in order to be more effective? Something that gives a cue to a person to correct their output and performance, because they might just ignore the watch. They might ignore the data. The commander may not get the message about the alert that he's gone into the red zone or black zone. But that's only the physiological. The mental aspect was a great question. That's where we really struggle. How do we map and characterize the brain and the brain activity? When is it going to come time where someone develops the sensor for the brain and the brain activity to actually control that response that's most important in battle? Fear, flight, or fight? Can that actually be manipulated? Can you imagine an array worn in our helmet, our special helmet, which turns us on to the fight instead of the fear of the flight? Talk about asymmetric advantage in the person. That's what we need. That's an active sensor, but it's a difficult challenge to map the brain activity. I got it, but I know people are looking at it at different universities, but that really is where I'd hope this goes in the future. Not just passive, but active.
One of the things that we saw, for instance, in the pool standard where they're really challenged and, it's a pretty tough pool exercise that they have to pass, but the trainers are pulling guys out of the water, and some of the guys are actually hypoxic and they're going to drown if they're not pulled out. Some of them have actually passed out in the water because they would rather die in the water than fail that standard. And it's kind of like, how do you bottle that guy in terms of the mental, physical? And I don't know how to. I mean, that's just an interesting observation, Corbin.
Yes, I'm going to try to use a laser pointer here without hitting Buddy in the eye. But you see this fellow here? Right after that picture was taken, he was pulled out of the water because at that point he was in flight mode. He was literally clawing at the air to get out of the water. This fellow right here was a very poor swimmer when he started, extremely poor, but he worked so hard to build in his mind that he could do this that he remained calm the entire time. This guy was a very talented swimmer. He failed, this guy succeeded. And so how do I get it to the point where I build someone to understand the warrior mindset? He came in as a millennial. He came in a constructive society. He was met with a realist society of this is the standard, you have to deal with it. And he eventually overcame and adapted. This guy came in with a bunch of skills that he thought could substitute his mindset, and then eventually he failed.
Any questions? Comments?
Please. Table 19.
Thank you so much. Just a quick comment. It's interesting listening to what you're talking about. So two things. The Buddhists, they've done a ton of this neuroimaging with functional MRI with the Buddhists, looking at how do they handle sort of 40 years of potential conflict that they've been through, how torture that they've been in when they've been imprisoned. How do they handle that? And what are the practices that they use? I don't know what they're doing in terms of wearables and trackables and so forth, but the data that they're looking at is really interesting. And then the last comment you made about how do you figure out who's got the skills versus the mindset? And I think, Carol Dweck at Stanford does a ton of work around this stuff where you look at kind of the resilience mindset, the skills that people bring to the table. And how does that change? How do you take an inner city kid who doesn't have great grades, but their resilience is incredible, and they're capable of molding and shaping and changing? So just two sort of disparate kind of other examples that seem really relevant as you're speaking. So really interesting.
Let me hit on the Eastern methodology, and then we'll pass on the second part of your question to somebody else. Back about 10 years ago, we had very interesting studies and presentations in our service from Dave Grossman, his book On Killing, on Combat. And then he had a series of lectures, of which now have to a relative degree been inculcated within our service. And a lot of that we took from, if you will, Eastern methodology is breathing, how important breathing is to the psyche, especially when an elevated condition or heart rate, how to practice yourself into deep breathing and also meditation. It's important afterwards to be able to kind of center and focus. It's kind of weird to hear that from a Marine at a table, right? But it actually really does work. Years of study, years of practice. We often forget how important just a simple breath is when your heart rate goes so high that it can actually stabilize you to make good decisions and bring you out of the black or red into a better place.
Go ahead.
Excuse me. I wanted to ask you just basically, Daniel Kahneman was a Nobel Prize-winning decision-making psychologist and looked at decision-making under stress and looked at the role different people should take in combat. Do you think you're basically still at the place, this point in time, that you don't know how somebody's going to respond till you put them in that situation? Do you think you're still at that spot?
That's a good question.
I would actually say yes, because here's the short story. In training, we are simulating a combat environment. And in a combat environment, there are many and different types of environment, from if you're getting shot by a sniper vice ambush, vice versa. So I think to answer that, you can say this general term combat, but getting blown up by an IED or getting shot at are two very different experiences. So we could try to prepare guys as much we can for that, but a lot of that is just to prepare them for the first few seconds.
I think additionally, when you're in training or you're putting someone through a simulation, generally they're aware that they're in training and they're in a simulation, right? So it's the old saying, the two-way range. When bullets are coming back, the enemy has a will, and you're hunting them and they're hunting you. I think that has a psychological effect on people that we don't know how to replicate in training or simulation yet. So that's one of the reasons we're looking to potentially map guys that have been successful in combat in these scenarios, and then we see how that correlates to students coming through. So we can say, hey, listen, you fit the profile of a guy that's been very successful in these strenuous situations, because we can't predict, right? We can't predict, but we can try to anticipate, and we can try to mitigate risk by putting the right people in the right places.
Okay, great question. That's one I've kind of thought about for a while. Does training really help? Can you predict behavior? I would say Malcolm Gladwell's book Outliers is probably a good example. It takes 10,000 repetitions to make it instinctive. The problem is in training, we don't have 10,000 chances to get on the range and replicate real behavior like a baseball player or a pitcher would have to become really very efficient at your skill. We have a limited time. We told you 4 weeks to maybe 4 or 5 months. That's not 10,000 repetitions. So you wonder why some of your very well special forces do so well. They're so well trained. They get so many reputations. And after a while, they understand how they're going to act in combat because they have practiced so much. So the more reps and sets we can do ensures our success in combat. If you're trained well, you will behave well in combat. There's a reason we're still sitting here at the table today, because we faced some of that. But it is challenging, and we all come to a point of which you get scared. You have to confront that, accept that, overcome it with your training and your actions. It should be secondary.
Mark, sorry. Oh, sorry, Corin.
First, thank you for what you're doing. It's extremely important. Our lives, our children's lives, our grandchildren's lives depend on it. I've got a couple of questions. The work you're doing it's on a very limited population of people.
Yes.
And they're very unusual people.
Yes.
There aren't any surrogates that are going to apply. With all apologies to the NBA, very different. So it may take years, if not decades, for you to achieve your laudable goals. Is your leadership aware of that, and are they committed to the long haul? One question. Second question is, are you looking at genetics as well?
I can take
Question. Yeah, go ahead.
So on the first question, to give context, yes, we are a very small demographic. And yes, there's only 1,000 people that come through. And from a statistical point of view, I need hundreds of thousands of data points times thousands of data points to be able to make statistical supported decisions. But the beauty of this is these photos that you're seeing up here, the reconnaissance community is a very small, tiny cell of there's 1,000 overall recon Marines out of 185,000. And the unique part about it is that the training that the students go through on a regular basis, they're going through right now, and I've looked through all the whole historical documents, is almost exactly down to the same trail that was used, training that was done for 10 years. So one of our goals in order to speed up that cycle is not only create enough initial observations to come up with an hypothesis, then go out to the greater reconnaissance community, some of which these guys have been doing for 25 years, and start comparing and taking notes to speed up that process. Now, long term, we're at the beginning of a goal of saying, how can we create better and more reconnaissance Marines? We recognize it could very well take 10 years. It's understood. On the second question,
Yeah, that's a tough question about the genetics. We don't select it. We are truly a meritocracy. We're all very proud of that. Everyone gets a chance to play at the table now for infantry, male or female. Race does not matter. Age does not matter to a certain point for recruiting.
Well,
but
another way to look at it is, I have a baby today. I want to know what that baby might be able to do.
yeah, you never know. I don't know. It's tough to say for DNA whether that's going to preclude you to a certain ability or task group here. I just know that we give everyone a chance. And now that we have some military occupational specialty performance tests, you get the chance. Doesn't matter who's sitting at that table. If you can do those tests, you can pass, you can select into it. And that's just our simple screening. But predictive, who do we recruit and recruit to? We don't do that. This is America where everyone gets a chance to come to the table.
Would you please join with me? I don't know about you, but I get choked up. Would you please thank these people keeping our country safe?